Hello, everyone. Hello. Just going to give a few people a few minutes to come in at the door. It is early evening for me. If you are in a different time zone, if you're not on the East Coast, please go ahead and share where you're coming in from. I always love seeing where everyone is coming from. My name is Rachel Scheinerman. I edit the website My Jewish Learning, and we're going to talk about the Talmudic take on Tisha B'Av tonight. Some of the things the rabbis say in the Talmud about Tisha B'Av will sound very familiar to you, and some of them don't really filter down to my experience of Tisha B'Av these days, and caught me a little bit by surprise. So I'm gonna just give everyone another minute or two to come in the door before we get started. And I will also preface this by saying, if you have been following My Jewish Learning for a while, and if you happen to join a year or two ago, I gave a class on ahead of Tisha B'Av. In that class, we explored the Talmudic story about the destruction of the temple as our text study ahead of Tisha B'Av. That was in Tractate Gittin, and the rabbis tell this long and complicated story about why the temple is destroyed. Tonight's program is completely different. Tonight, we're going to look at the rabbis talking specifically about Tisha B'Av. And interestingly enough, they don't talk about Tisha B'Av in that story of the destruction of the temple at all. It's in the middle of Tractate Gittin, which is about Jewish divorce. And they do talk about Tisha B'Av at the very end of Ta'anit, which is the tractate that deals with fasts. As many of you probably already know, there are all kinds of fasts in Judaism beyond Yom Kippur, right? Which is a fast of atonement. There are also fasts in case of catastrophe, and there are fasts that commemorate sad things in Jewish history, of which Tisha B'Av is, of course, the most significant one. So with that as a little preamble, Becky, does it look to you like folks have managed to come in the door here?
I think we're good to go.
Okay. All right. Lovely to see you all. Okay. So welcome. We will go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and of course the page has disappeared. There it is. Okay. All right, folks, let me know. Are we looking at the right thing? This does not look like the right thing to me. Does this look wrong?
We can't see anything that you're sharing yet.
I'm sorry. We did test this right before we got started. This is the page to share. Share. It says my screen share is paused. Why would that be? Is it working now?
No, sorry. You want me to share?
Yeah, Becky, would thank us for good colleagues and help in the background here. I'm not sure why this is not working. So Becky, I'm going to rely on you to go ahead and share.
No worries.
Today. All right. A lot of East Coasters I see. Yeah, but not only Des Moines High, Shaker Heights. I spent summer in Cleveland. Wilton, Connecticut. You're my neighbor. I'm in New Haven. Okay. Any luck there, Becky, with sharing the presentation?
Can you see?
Yes, I think so. Okay, what? All right.
Can the audience give a thumbs up if you guys can see? All right, excellent.
Okay, but I am not seeing it, which is extra weird. I'm seeing you, Becky. But why am I not seeing this document? It's very odd. Okay, if I can't see it, it's not going to go well. Can't do it blindfolded.
Can you open it on your own? Don't look through Zoom, but just look at your own slideshow.
All right. All right. Can folks? All right. All right. Are we on the? We will do.
Everybody else can see. So if you go through your own slideshow, I'll just flip the pages when you talk.
So this is the title page. Then let's take a look at this piece of classic art of the destruction of the temple. This would probably be a picture of the inside the temple. This is the primary altar with the four corners on it, and you can see it's pretty gory. Remembering that when we are commemorating the destruction of the temple, it is not just the temple that was destroyed, but a lot of lives were lost in the process. So this is a text-heavy presentation. I don't have a lot of great images, so I just wanted to share this one off the bat. And let's go ahead and dive into the Talmud. So when we study Talmud, we always start with the Mishnah, the earlier layer in the Talmud. And there are two things that the Mishnah does when it talks about Tisha B'Av. One is saying what Tisha B'Av commemorates, and the other is saying what we do on Tisha B'Av to commemorate. So we're going to do both tonight. And my goal for us, this is really all in the last few pages of Tractate Ta'anit. My goal is to actually run us through relatively quickly a fair amount of material. And then we will have some time to talk about it as well. But when you leave this class, you will have read through, I would say, highlights of the last few pages of Ta'anit, which is really the full Talmudic discussion of Tisha B'Av. So let's start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Becky, are we on the one that says Mishnah Ta'anit 26b at the top?
Yep.
Great. So the Mishnah says 5 things happened to our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz and 5 on the 9th of Av, right? 2 fast days. 17th of Tammuz comes exactly 40 days after Shavuot. So it passed a few weeks ago, and it is a half fast. It's just a daylight fast. It starts in the morning and ends at sundown. 9th of Av is a full fast. So what are the 5 things that we commemorate on the 17th of Tammuz? 1, the tablets were broken. If you know what that means, go ahead and pop it in the chat for us. 2, the daily offering was nullified. 3, the city walls of Jerusalem were breached. This was right before the temple was destroyed, right? You have to get into the city first before you can destroy the temple that's at the core. Apostemos burned a Torah scroll, and somebody, later commentary suggests this might be Menashe, but the Gemara just says he placed an idol in the sanctuary. Okay, yes. And so the first event here is the tablets were broken. Yep, bunch of people have gotten it. It's Moses broke the first set of tablets, right? If you remember Exodus 32, Moses goes up the mountain, receives the Torah for 40 days. Meanwhile, down at the bottom of the mountain, Aaron is helping the Israelites construct a golden calf. And God says to Moses, do you hear what's going on down there? I'm going to destroy them. And Moses says, please don't. That would not be, Moses begs God not to, and then Moses goes down the mountain to deal with them. And then Moses is filled with anger, and he actually takes the 10 commandments and he smashes them right into the mountain at the bottom of, and this is like the original event that the Mishnah says the 17th of Tammuz commemorates. So it's, and then there's a whole series of other events that were preludes to the destruction of the temple. But originally, it's that sin of the golden calf, which I think is very interesting. And I think you'll see an interesting parallel when we look at the 5 events that preceded, that are commemorated on the 9th of Av. So, Becky, do you have a copy of the source sheet? I can share this too, actually. I see someone asking for it.
We'll send it around afterwards. We can send the PDF.
Okay, yes. And after the class, we will make a proper PDF of this and send it around. But if someone wants to open it on their own, you can do that as well. All right, so let's go ahead to the next slide.
Okay, we're there.
Oh, great. I have to do it myself here. Okay. So the Mishnah continues. On the 9th of Av, also 5 events that we are commemorating. The first one, it was decreed that our ancestors would not enter the land of Israel. Okay. If you know what that is, go ahead and put that one in the chat too. The temple was destroyed for the first time, right? That should sound familiar to you, right? That's what we usually talk about when we talk about Tisha B'Av. And the second time, right? First temple destruction, second temple destruction. Beitar was captured. This would have been after the destruction of the second temple. There was a revolt against Rome, led by Bar Kokhba, who was supported by Rabbi Akiva in about, I want to say 112, so maybe 42, 45 years, like somewhere in there, after the destruction of the second temple. It was a disaster. It was really, really didn't go well. And one of the major disasters of that revolt was the capture and slaughter of people in Beitar. And the city of Jerusalem was plowed, which means that the city was laid waste in a way that made rebuilding the temple very difficult. So what do you guys think of this spread? 135 in the Bar Kochba. Okay, thank you, Becky. I should have looked that one up before we started. So a little bit more, a little bit further along than I'm wondering why 112 sticks in my head. Okay, yes. Okay, so the first one here is that the Israelites were decreed they may not enter the land of Israel. And interestingly enough, from the rabbi's perspective, that is the original tragedy of Tisha B'Av. It's not the destruction of the temples, which is really, really interesting to me, because we always talk about this holiday as commemorating the destruction of the temples. And it's really interesting to me that the rabbis connect it here to the decree, right? So what happened is Moses sent out spies in the second year after the Exodus from Egypt, sent out spies. This is recorded in the book of Numbers to reconnoiter the land of Israel. And they come back and they say, yes, it's really a beautiful, fertile land. And look, we have grapes the size of we have a cluster of grapes the size of a person. Look how fertile this land is. But not only is the produce huge, the people are huge too. It's populated by giants, and there is no way we can conquer this land. And this absolutely terrifies the Israelites and absolutely infuriates God. It is perhaps an even more significant rift in the relationship between God and Israel than the golden calf, which is really interesting. And for the rabbis, this is the original tragedy that we commemorate on the 9th of Av. It is then connected to the destruction of the temples. All right, so let me take a peek at the chat. Becky, if you're watching too and there's anything you think I should respond to immediately, let me know.
There was a question about someone thought, wasn't it only Moses who was decreed not able to enter the land of Israel?
No, that Moses was not allowed to enter the land of Israel. That's true. And we're told that's because Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock to bring forth water as God told him to do. But actually this entire generation that experienced the Exodus from Egypt, all of them died in the wilderness. Not a single one, except for Joshua, got to enter the land. All right. So let's see. Very interesting statement in the Mishnah that all of these events happened on the 9th of Av, and then the Gemara works very hard to prove that all these events actually happened on the 9th of Av, and it's pretty interesting how they do it. Caleb too, thank you, Joshua and Caleb. Okay, Serach bat Asher, thank you. You guys are so learned. I really appreciate this. All right, excellent. Okay, but the point is, at least most of that generation, the vast majority, right? How many? I bet folks know this too. Facts and figures off the top of my head, not my strong suit, but probably somebody here knows exactly how many people left Egypt that day, according to the Torah. So if, 3 of them made it through, that's still the vast majority of the generation. Yeah, 600,000 at Sinai, right? Okay, good. I was going to say that, but then I got nervous. Okay, so let's talk about dating, because the rabbis do some work to show these dates. And so in the Gemara, what you need to know before we look at the Gemara on these dates is you need to know that the first Hebrew month of the year is Nisan. If you thought it was Tishrei, you would be forgiven for thinking that, of course, because Rosh Hashanah falls on the 1st of Tishrei. And so we might think of Tishrei in September as the first month of the year. But from a biblical and rabbinic perspective, it's really not. It's Nisan. The book of Exodus says that the Exodus happened in the first month of the year in Nisan. And if you think about the liturgical calendar, if you think about the festival calendar, right? Nisan is when we celebrate the Exodus from Egypt. That's followed by Shavuot, when we celebrate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And then finally Sukkot, the wandering, which commemorates the wandering through the wilderness. Chronologically, right? That's the order, that's the experience of stepping through the year. And also, if you think of an agricultural society, the year just makes sense if you start in the spring and it goes through to the harvest, right? So from the perspective of the Bible and the rabbis, Nisan really is the first month of the year. Not that there aren't other cycles that aren't important, including cycles that begin in Tishrei, right? And the cycle, there are different cycles in the year, but what you have to understand for this discussion is Nisan is the first month of the year, which makes Av the 5th month of the year. So let's take a look at how the rabbis do this dating. We'll go ahead to the next slide that says dating the divine decree, right? Dating the divine decree that the Israelites would not enter the land of Israel. Okay, this is where the rabbis do some very fancy math, and I'm going to walk us through it because it's really quite brilliant how they managed to make all this work. Okay, they stitched together a whole bunch of verses in the book of Numbers, and we will step through and they will show you exactly how they come to the calculation that the spies returned on the 9th of Av. Okay, so here we are in the Gemara. It says on the 9th of Av, it was decreed upon our ancestors that they would not enter the land of Israel. And from where do we derive this date? All right, here we go. As it is written, and it came to pass in the 1st month in the 2nd year on the 1st day of the month that the tabernacle was erected. Okay, so Exodus 40 tells us that the tabernacle was erected in the 2nd year, in the 1st month. Of course, that's Nisan. And at the beginning of the 2nd year, Moses erected the tabernacle and sent the spies. And and how do we know that? It is written, and it came to pass in the 2nd year, in the 2nd month, on the 20th day of the month, that the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle of the testimony. Okay, so 2nd month, 20th day of the month, that means we are now at the 20th of ER. The cloud comes up from the tabernacle of testimony. And then if we read on, now we're in the book of Numbers, and I'm on the 2nd paragraph here, and it is further written, and they set forward from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey. Okay, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina said, that very day they turned away from God, as it is written, and the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting, and the children of Israel also wept on their part and said, would that we were given flesh to eat. They're complaining about the desert diet. And it is written that the Jews ate meat for an entire month. God sent them, I think, quails, right? And so if we add the 20 days to those first 20 days, an additional 3 days journey, we add 23 more days, and now we have landed the subsequent month of 29 days of eating meat ended on the 22nd of Sivan. So 23 days takes us from the 20th of ER, where we were in the 1st paragraph, to the 22nd of Sivan. Okay, they're pulling these date markers out of the Torah. All right, let's go on to the 3rd paragraph. After this, it is written, and Miriam was shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not journey until she was brought in again. Okay, so now we pause for 7 days while Miriam is shut out. Including these 7 days, they remained at Chatzerot until the 29th of Sivan before traveling to Paran. Okay, so now we're on the 29th of Sivan, and now they're going to travel to Paran, which is where they sent out the spies. And indeed, it is written immediately afterward. I'm in the 4th paragraph now. Send you men that they may spy out the land of Canaan. And this calculation is taught in a Braita, an early rabbinic text. On the 29th of Sivan, Moses sent the spies. We have in other words, they have another rabbinic text that tells them that Moses sent the spies on the 29th of Sivan. They're not relying on it here. They showed you how they got to the 29th of Sivan, but they do have another tradition as well that says that. And it is written, and they returned from spying the land at the end of 40 days. So if we calculate forward 40 days from the 29th of Sivan, where does that land us? That lands us on the 9th of Av. Okay, if you're mopping your brow, that's okay. You didn't have to. What is the exact source of this wonderful math exercise? Good question. Okay, all of this is in the last few pages of Ta'anit. So on this source sheet, I didn't give the exact pages of everything, but all of it follows the Mishnah, which was on Ta'anit 26b. So if you just start reading on Ta'anit 26b, you will run into this quickly. I can't say the exact page right now. It might be 27 or 28 at this point, because I did pick out excerpts. Okay. All right. So that was a lot of work the rabbis did, but they made the math work. And indeed, it seems that the spies returned from spying the land on the 9th of Av. And that's, of course, when they give their evil report and lie about how dangerous the peoples living in the land are, which leads the Israelites to weep and moan and say they wish they would go back to Egypt. And for that reason, God condemns that entire generation, minus Joshua and Caleb, thank you all, from entering the land of Israel. All right, there's one other really interesting little bit here about this about the spies. I find it one of the most troubling and complicated little bits in this whole section of Gemara. So I did want to share it with you. It's on the next slide, and I didn't even give it a title because I didn't want to prejudice anybody's interpretation of this text. But I'm really interested what folks think about this. Okay, and so are we all set, Becky? It starts, and it is further written.
Yep, all set.
Okay, great. And it is further written, and all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. That is, of course, the night that the spies return from the land of Israel and are lying about how dangerous the peoples living in the land are, and scare the Israelites from and make them think that it would be impossible to conquer this land, right? So the congregation lifted up their voices and they cried and they wept that night. And Rabbi Yochanan said, that night was the night of the 9th of Av. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, you wept needlessly that night. There's no good reason to weep. It wasn't a real threat. And I will therefore establish for you weeping in future generations. I'm curious about your thoughts. This to me is really a gut punch. This idea that God says, well, you shouldn't have been weeping that night, so I will give you something real to cry about in future generations. Very interesting, very, very different than what we saw in Gittin, if you joined us for that class. And if not, maybe we'll send a link to it in the follow-up to this course if you want to watch the recording. Very, very different than what the rabbis say in Gittin about why the temple was destroyed, right? It was there, they talk about, well, it's complicated, but right, it's got a lot to do with interpersonal mistreatment and rabbinic inaction in there. And it's got nothing to do with something of a past generation. Yeah, okay. All right. So really, really fascinating, very, very different take on Tisha B'Av than we find in Gittin. Really complicated and challenging text for me. I don't have an interpretation yet of this that feels good to me, but I really welcome you to discuss it in the chat as well. Let's continue on our dating journey because there's more to be said about the dates. How do we know, for instance, that the first temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av? Well, this one's a little bit easier because the Hebrew Bible describes the destruction of the temple, the first temple. It's at the very end of 2 Kings, which is toward the end of the whole Deuteronomic history, the history of Israel that extends from the book of Deuteronomy through Joshua and Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. It's all one big saga of the history of Israel after the Exodus from Egypt, and it culminates practically in the destruction of the first temple. And so there's a record of it there. It's also mentioned when it happened in the book of Jeremiah, because he's the prophet of that generation of the destruction, and he went into exile with the Israelites. And what do you know? They both are close to the 9th of Av, but neither one is exactly on the 9th of Av. So the rabbis do have a little bit of a dating problem here. So let's take a look at how they handle this. Right? The Mishnah taught that on the 9th of Av, the temple was destroyed the first time, as it is written. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, right? So remember, 5th month is Av, right? That's what you have to remember for this presentation. And on the 7th day of the month, meaning the 7th of Av, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant to the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and burned the house of the Lord. Okay, so 2 Kings seems to think it happened on the 7th of Av. And then it is also written, paragraph 2, and in the 5th month, on the 10th day of the month. Okay, so this would be the 10th of Av, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, who served the king of Babylon, came into Jerusalem, and he burned the house of the Lord. Okay, so 2 Kings think it was on the 7th of Av. Jeremiah seems to think it's on the 10th of Av. Why are we not celebrating? Why are we commemorating this event on the 9th of Av? The rabbis are going to solve that problem for us on the next slide, right? And it is taught, it is impossible to say that the temple was burned on the 7th of Av, as it has already been stated in Jeremiah that it was destroyed on the 10th. And it is also impossible to say that the temple was burned on the 10th of Av, as it has already been stated in 2 Kings that it was destroyed on the 7th. So what actually occurred, right? And here's their answer. On the 7th of Av, Gentiles entered the sanctuary, and on the 7th and 8th day, they ate there and desecrated it. On the 9th, adjacent to nightfall, they set fire to it, and it continuously burned the entire next day, as it is stated, "Woe unto us, for the day has declined, for the shadows of the evening are stretched out." So the solution here is that the destruction occurred from the 7th to the 10th. And that's why one source says the 7th and one source says the 10th. And specifically, the 7th is the day that the Babylonian armies entered the temple. They spent a day or two desecrating it. And then when the sun set on the 9th, just as the 9th was ending, they set it on fire, and it burned for an entire day all the way through the 10th, which is why Jeremiah says it was destroyed on the 10th. And this is what Rabbi Yochanan meant when he said, had I been alive in that generation, I would have established the fast only on the 10th of Av, because most of the sanctuary was burned on that day. It only started to burn on at the very end of the 9th. And the sages who established the fast on the 9th say that it's preferable to mark the beginning of the tragedy. Okay, so this is, I think, a pretty good solution to a textual problem they have, that they have two different dates, neither of which is the 9th of Av for the destruction of the temple. Let's go ahead and step through the rest of the dating material. The rest will be a little bit quicker here. Okay, so how do they date the destruction of the second temple? Well, that isn't recorded, of course, in the Hebrew scriptures, because it happened after the Hebrew scriptures were written. So what do they say about this? Really simply, and the Mishnah further taught that the temple was destroyed for the second time, also on the 9th of Av. From where do we derive that the temple was destroyed on this date? It is taught a meritorious matter is brought about on an auspicious day, and a deleterious matter on an inauspicious day. In other words, it shouldn't surprise us that the second temple was destroyed on the same day as the first, because certain days, because of the things that happen on them, become either lucky or unlucky. And so these bad events tend to cluster up. Okay, and then similarly, we'll go ahead and blaze through some of this, because I want to make sure we get through all the material tonight. The destruction of Beitar. The Mishnah teaches that the Beitar was captured on the 9th of Av. This too, by tradition, we've heard. That's all the proof that they need. Okay, so they have now stacked 4 tragedies onto the 9th of Av. We started with the spies coming back with the evil report, which led the Israelites to weep and cry and led God to condemn the Israelites to die off in the wilderness. And then we have the destruction of both temples, and then we have this perhaps worst event of the Bar Kokhba revolt that happened. This would have been more close in recent history for the rabbis who wrote this, right? This is for some of them in living memory, right? Not for all of them, but for some of them, right? We're in that generation. Okay, they don't actually, there was a 5th item on the list, right? That was 4, there's a 5th one. And the rabbis don't bother giving a proof of the date, but the 5th item was this idea that Jerusalem was plowed under. And that really is more future focused, because the plowing of Jerusalem meant that the temple would not be rebuilt anytime soon. So we have these past tragedies, but we also have this one that really stretches into the indefinite future. And instead of giving us dating on this, the rabbis actually give us a really interesting story that wraps up their discussion of the dating, and it just puts a whole nother spin on this day of commemoration and mourning. So we're going to take a look at this. So this is on the plowing of Jerusalem. I couldn't title it Dating the Plowing of Jerusalem, because they don't bother proving the date. They just assume it's correct. But they tell a really interesting story here. So the Mishnah taught that on the 9th of Av, the city of Jerusalem was plowed. It is taught the wicked Turner Rufus plowed the sanctuary. He's the Roman official who was in charge of this last stage of destruction. A decree was issued. So when the wicked Turner Rufus plowed the sanctuary, a decree was issued against Rabban Gamliel for execution. Okay, he's like the standout rabbi of that generation. And to seal the deal, the Romans issue a decree of execution for him. A certain Roman officer came and stood in the study hall and said, "The man with the nose is wanted. The man with the nose is wanted." Okay, so this Roman officer comes to the Jewish study hall and cryptically warns Rabban Gamliel with this phrase, "The man with the nose is wanted. The man with the nose is wanted." Adine Steinsaltz's commentary on this suggests what is the deal with Rabban Gamliel and his nose? Did he just have a huge nose? I don't know. Adine Steinsaltz says he is like the nose on the face of this generation because he stands out. Right. I don't know. What went through my head when I read this was this idea that like the Romans actually prized people with large nose. That was a sign of beauty. And Rabban Gamliel was very educated in Roman culture and did very well with Roman officials and Roman contemporaries. So maybe in some ways he fit in with Roman, he spoke Greek, like he might have fit in a certain way with the non-Jewish world in which he lived. But in any case, it's sort of this funny expression, "The man with the nose is wanted." But Rabban Gamliel knows exactly what that means, and he goes into hiding. The Roman officer is not done. Not only does the Roman officer tip Rabban Gamliel off that he is a wanted man, that the Romans are going to try and execute him, he then goes and talks to him in private in his hiding spot and said to him, "If I save you from death, will you bring me into the world to come?" We have a Roman officer who seems to believe in the Jewish worldview and wants a piece of the Jewish world to come. And Rabban Gamliel says to him, "Yeah, if you save me from death, I will bring you into the world to come." And the officer said to Rabban Gamliel, "Swear to me." So he swore to him. And then what does the officer do? He ascended to the roof, fell, and died. And the Romans had a tradition that when they issued a decree and one of their advisors died, they would then cancel the decree. So what did this Roman officer do? He threw himself off the roof because it was a way to cancel the decree against Rabban Gamliel. He traded his life for Rabban Gamliel's life. And for a promise that he would be brought into the world to come. And does it work? Yes, it does, right? Last line, a divine voice emerged and said, that officer is designated for life, for the life of the world to come. So this whole sequence where we mourn the Romans as the bad guys who destroyed and just the destruction of the temple and Beitar ends with the story of this Roman officer who doesn't feel that way at all, and who believes in the Jewish God and the Jewish world to come, and who saves one of the great sages of the Jewish generation and gives his life to save that sage. Which another thing I just didn't expect here was Gamliel the one who hid in the cave for 12 years with his son? No, that was God, it went right out of my head. Shimon Bar Yochai. Thank you. You guys are all faster than me. Yes, that was Shimon Bar Yochai, who didn't he have to fall, as suicide is not favored? Yeah, it's true that's a very good point, Judith, that Judaism does not look kindly on suicide. It might have been looked at more as martyrdom in this case. Who was okay, and is designated for life other than come sounds like the officer had some interval before he entered the world to come. Possibly. Don't know. I haven't gotten there myself yet. Okay. Oh, yes. And the Romans like chiseled jaws. Okay. Great comments. Thank you, everybody. All right. So this concludes the first half of the material in the end of Ta'anit. We're still in these last few pages of Ta'anit. Everything in this presentation is from Ta'anit 26b forward, and the whole tractate ends about page 30. So it's all in there if you want to go check it out. I didn't put page numbers on every page, but it's all clustered up together. Let's go back to the Mishnah now and look at the second portion of the Mishnah. We've talked about what what Tisha B'Av commemorates, but we haven't really talked much about how we practice it. And some of this discussion is kind of interesting. So let's look at what the Mishnah says. The first thing the Mishnah says is, from when Av begins, one decreases joy. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Was that ringing any bells for anybody? We have another the opposite of Adar. That's right, Leah, right? When Adar comes in, we increase our joy, right? But when Tisha B'Av is actually like pretty much diametrically opposite on the calendar from Adar. And it is sort of an anti-Adar here. And if you think about it, Purim is like a destruction averted, right? And so it's very joyous. And Tisha B'Av is a destruction that was not averted. And so it's very sad. So it's very interesting that they will draw a very specific parallel later in the Gemara, but this is all the Mishnah says about it. Okay, here's what else we don't do. During the week in which the 9th of Av occurs, it is prohibited to cut one's hair and launder one's clothes. These are behaviors of mourning, not cutting your hair, not laundering your clothes. But if the 9th of Av occurs on a Friday, on Thursday, these actions are permitted in deference to Shabbat. If the 9th of Av is going to be followed by Shabbat, we don't want it to interfere overly with our enjoyment of Shabbat. So you can do those things on Thursday. And then there's an extended discussion in the Gemara of all of this, which if we had rolled enough in time, we could get into all the nitty-gritty details of what does the week of Tisha B'Av mean? Does that include a week before Tisha B'Av? Is it the 9 days of Av from the beginning of the month? Does it include up to the end of the week after Tisha B'Av? With the laundering of clothes, do you launder them and set them aside? Do you launder them and wear them, right? There's a whole long discussion of it in the Gemara, which I will bring you a taste of, but we can't do all of it tonight. Okay, but these are two of the things that we don't do in anticipation of Tisha B'Av, is cut our hair and launder our clothes. And then third paragraph, on the eve of the 9th of Av, a person may not eat 2 cooked dishes, and one may neither eat meat nor drink wine. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says adjust, which means eat less. Okay, so the last meal that you eat before the fast is to be simple. The 2 cooked dishes is the rabbi's idea of a fancy meal, right? That means a luxurious meal, right? So when they say don't eat 2 cooked dishes, they mean eat something simple. Eat a simple meal and avoid the meat and the wine, also signs of a more luxurious meal. Meat in the ancient world was much eaten more rarely than in our world today. It was really not an everyday thing. And Shimon ben Gamliel says also don't overeat, like eat for your needs, but don't eat a ton. Okay, and the last thing in the Mishnah says about this is Rabbi Yehuda obligates one to overturn the bed and sleep on the floor, but the rabbis did not agree with him. I like this one. It's like, and also sleep on the floor like a mourner, but the rabbis think that one goes a little too far. And they apparently, most of them did sleep in their beds on the night of the 9th of Av. So I guess there are limits here. So let's take a look at some of the discussions around some of these things in the Mishnah. Let's go to the idea that Av is unlucky for Jews, right? The Mishnah said when Av begins, one decreases joy. And the Gemara takes this a little further. Now we're in the Gemara. It says the Mishnah teaches that from when the month of Av begins, one decreases acts of rejoicing. Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, said in the name of Rav, just as when Av begins, one decreases rejoicing, so too when the month of Adar begins, marbim besimcha, we increased rejoicing. And Rav Papa said, therefore, in the case of here's the practical matter, right? In the case of a Jew who has litigation with a Gentile, let him avoid him in the month of Av when his fortune is bad, and he should make himself available in the month of Adar when his fortune is good. So if you are either suing a non-Jew or being sued by a non-Jew, try and get that court case to trial in Adar and not in Av, because in Av, the fortune of the Jews is not good. Again, keyed into this idea that there are just some times of year that are less lucky, that are less fortunate. And it's not entirely an accident that all these tragedies happened on the same date. But there's my practical advice for you tonight. If you're planning to sue somebody who's not Jewish, you might want to wait a few weeks till Av is over. Okay, let me give you a taste of the laundry discussion, because this goes on and on and on, right? Where the Mishnah taught that during the week in which 9th of Av occurs, it is prohibited to cut one's hair and launder one's clothes, right? We just read that. Rav Nachman said, they taught that it is prohibited only to launder and to wear. However, if one wishes to launder and set them aside, this is permitted. Okay, I will fully admit that I follow Rav Nachman in my house. I have done laundry this week. I have 3 kids. It would not be possible to wait several weeks on laundry. And Rav Sheshet said, even to launder them and to set them aside is prohibited. Okay, Rav Sheshet is stricter. And he says, know that I am correct, as the launderers of Rav's household were idle during this week. All right. And then there is a whole lot more to be discussed here. Rav Hamnuna raised an objection to Rav Nachman and said, on Thursday, these actions are permitted in deference to Shabbat. To which actions is it referring? If we say that it's permitted to launder and wear clothes immediately, how is that deference to Shabbat if you're laundering and wearing it immediately on Thursday? Rather, it must mean that he can wash it and set it aside to wear on Shabbat. And this washing is permitted only on Thursday. However, to the rest of the week, it is prohibited. And then there's a counter opinion. Actually, maybe the Mishnah permits one to launder and wear a garment immediately on Thursday, but this is only if he only has one shirt, right? If it's your only shirt and you want to wash it on Thursday, then you kind of have to put it back on, right? What else are you going to do? Go naked for 2 days, right? Okay. So anyway, this goes on and on and on. There's a lot of detail here, and you're invited to go check it out in the Gemara yourself if you want the full discussion, but we're not going to be able to do it all tonight. So I just wanted to bring you a taste of the long discussion of just what it means to not do laundry the week before Tisha B'Av. Let's go ahead to the next slide. There is some question when it says the week of Tisha B'Av, does that mean possibly that the prohibitions linger for the full week, right? If Tisha B'Av, as it is this week, comes early in the week, do those prohibitions remain in place after the day of mourning? And it was taught in a Braita, and one must observe the rites of mourning from the new moon until after the fast. This is a statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says these activities are prohibited throughout the entire month. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says they are prohibited only during the week. Okay, so there's different opinions about exactly how long those prohibitions last. And indeed, even today, there are different Jewish communities that have different traditions about what is prohibited and when it is prohibited in the lead up to Tisha B'Av, right? For some communities, it's the 9 days that precede the 9th of Av. For some, it's 3 weeks where certain prohibitions apply, and it will be regional in various Jewish communities. So we never got full agreement on all of that across the Jewish world. Let's go ahead to the next slide. The Gemara brings in other mourning I skipped, by the way, I will tell you what I skipped. I skipped also a long extended discussion about what it means to not eat 2 cooked meals and not eat meat and not eat wine. When do you have to stop eating those things? What can you eat in the meal? Does it depend what day that meal is, right? There's a whole discussion of that as well. But in the interest of time and to give us a little chance to discuss at the end of this hour, I decided to leave that out of the presentation. But I did want to bring you a few other mourning prohibitions that are found not in the Mishnah, but in the Gemara. Okay, so this is just the Gemara now. The sages taught, all mitzvot practiced by a mourner are likewise practiced on the 9th of Av. It is prohibited to engage in eating, right? We know because it's a fast, and drinking, smearing oil on one's body, wearing shoes, and conjugal relations. It is also prohibited to read from the Torah, from the prophets, from the writings, or to study from Mishnah, from the Gemara, from Midrash, from the collections of Halachot, and from the collections of Agadot. These are all the sacred texts of the Jewish people. You're not supposed to be studying because studying brings joy. There's an exception, however, right? Paragraph 2, however, one may read from a place in the Bible that he is unaccustomed to reading, as it will be difficult for him and he will not derive pleasure from it. Such an interesting view of what is pleasurable about Torah study, and this idea that studying something that's really hard is going to cause somebody to break their teeth and not enjoy it. So you can do that kind of study, but you can't review things that you know well and fluently because that will be too enjoyable, right? And likewise, he may study from a place of the Talmud that he is unaccustomed to studying. Okay, so if you've got a tough page of Gemara, have at it. And similarly, one may read from the book of Lamentations, which is hardly joyful, right? And it's what we do read on Tisha B'Av these days. And from the book of Job, also a tough read, also very difficult Hebrew, by the way. Like it's difficult emotionally, but it is also difficult to read in terms of the language. And from the evil matters in Jeremiah, meaning the prophecies of doom. And the school children interrupt their studies for the day because it is stated the precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart, right? So school children take the day off too, because we hope that their learning is joyful to them as well. So very interesting additional prohibition here in the Gemara on Tisha B'Av against studying Torah, with a lot of notable exceptions, right? And then finally, they wrap up with a question of whether you can do labor, right? So Tisha B'Av is not a festival. There is no automatic prohibition against working because it is, a sacred day to God. But it also doesn't really seem in the spirit of the holiday to perform labor. So we learn in a different Mishnah, in a place where people are accustomed to perform labor on the 9th of Av, one performs labor. And in a place where people were accustomed not to perform labor, one does not perform labor. So this seems, it seems for the rabbis, was a regional call. Some communities felt that it was appropriate to take the day off from work. Other communities did not. And they would go ahead and do their work that day during the day of mourning. But in all places, says the Gemara, Torah scholars are idle. And after all, we just learned that Torah study brings joy. So if your work is Torah, then you are idle for the day. And then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel wraps it up to say, a person should always conduct himself as a Torah scholar, perhaps suggesting that all of us really should consider taking the day off work to focus on mourning. Okay, and so I have one more slide to bring you, and then that will leave us just a little bit of time for discussion. This wraps up in the Gemara with some statements about how serious the rabbis are about all of these prohibitions for the day. How serious are they about fasting, about not working, about not studying Torah, right? How serious are they? Well, it is taught in another Braita, that another early rabbinic text, that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, whoever eats and drinks on the 9th of Av, although the prohibition was instituted by the prophets, meaning it's not found in Torah, but it's found in later scriptural writings, it is as though he eats and drinks on Yom Kippur. We take this as seriously as breaking the Yom Kippur fast. And Rabbi Akiva says, whoever performs labor on the 9th of Av never sees a sign of blessing from that work. And the sages say, whoever performs labor on the 9th of Av and does not mourn for Jerusalem will not see her future joy. If you do not participate in these rituals and this moment of communal mourning, then you will not see the future joy of Jerusalem when all of this destruction is reversed. As it is stated, rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad with her, all who love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all who mourn her, right? Those who mourn her will get the joy in the end. From here it is stated, whoever mourns for Jerusalem will merit to see her future joy, and whoever does not mourn for Jerusalem will not see her future joy. So that is the rabbinic statement on Tisha B'Av. This is what it commemorates. This is all the stuff you have to do, and this is how seriously we take it. If you are not part of these rituals, if you are not participating in them, it is like you are breaking Yom Kippur, and it is you who will not see the future joy of Jerusalem, perhaps hearkening back to those Israelites who never got to enter the promised land. Okay, so that is the end of the texts in Ta'anit. I was a little worried about getting through them all rapidly enough. And I wanted to see now and take a little time for discussion and see what your reactions to some of these texts are. Okay, I see there's a lot in the comments that I haven't had a chance to monitor closely, and I apologize for that. So there may be some very interesting questions that are popping in here. Yep, somebody says they're hypoglycemic. Of course, please always remember that with any Jewish fast, health comes first. Okay, that health comes first. We don't have children fast for a reason, and pregnant people do not fast, and likewise, people who are ill and whatever do not fast. So do not compromise your health. So that's the answer on that one. Okay. So yeah, what surprised people about these, and will it change how you think about Tisha B'Av this year in these texts? What stood out to you? Okay, Elijah says my kids are under 13. Should they miss school? Elijah, your kids are in school in August already? Are you down south where they start ridiculously early now? Is that what's going on for you? Yeah, good question. Should they miss school? I mean, this is your family's call, but I think we know what the rabbis would say on that. School started in Colorado and Puerto Rico. Okay, in Connecticut, we haven't started yet. Okay, thank you, Becky, for sharing the link to the slide. Okay, all right. And tomorrow in California, okay, kids are back in school already. Wow, school starts on tomorrow's Erev Tisha B'Av. Wow, okay. Okay, all right. I see Don has a hand up. So Becky, maybe we can invite him to ask a question.
Yeah, I enabled you to unmute, Don.
Hi, I had posted this in the chat. So my question is, did the spies attempt to engage with the locals at all? Or did they just observe and make the conclusion that they're dangerous?
Oh gosh, I probably should have reviewed numbers before this. If someone knows, I can't remember exactly. I remember they cut down a really big thing of grapes. How much they interacted with the locals, I don't remember exactly. Good question, but no engagement, says Lee. Okay, all right. Susan and Jasmine also have their hands up.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't say they engaged with the locals. They just observed them. They were large. And they weren't actually lying when they came back. They were really convinced that these people were too big. We looked like grasshoppers and we must have appeared like that to them. So that's
a close study of
and they just worked up all the people to be afraid and to say we can't do this. That's all but Caleb and Joshua, which is why Caleb and Joshua were allowed to enter the land.
Okay, so you think your take, Susan, is that everybody was telling the truth, they just had different perspectives?
They were telling what they believed. Yeah. They weren't deliberately lying to rouse the people. They were really scared, but they didn't realize that they were important people. They were, leaders, and they should not have been they should have had a little more faith and not done that.
Okay, thank you. But I'm inspired to go back to numbers and look at this more closely now. Who else would like to share? Who we got next, Becky?
Joanne is next. There we go.
Hi, Joanne.
Hello. Why is it that one chooses to call them spies and not scouts?
Oh, that's just a translation choice. Scouts would be fine too. They're sort of surreptitiously checking things out. So that has a sense of spying,
But that would have been the role of a scout. If you think of Kit Carson and all the scouts in the West, they were scoping to see what the territory was, who was there. The typical job of the scout.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a good word too. That's definitely a good word too. Thank you.
But spies imply malevolence on them intrinsically, which I don't think the Bible includes.
Well, I think spies imply secrecy to me. To me, spies imply secrecy. But yeah, I think we need to do a class on this. I need to study this more. Who else have we got, Becky?
Alex, please.
Hi, just a thought on this question you asked about, what is that? What is it getting at that God says, well, you didn't really have a reason to cry. Now I'm going to give you one.
Yeah, that was one of the most challenging teachings for me.
I think what they're being punished for is being intimidated and frightened before the fighting's even started, losing before the fighting started. And I think the message is, and I think this is true to this day, that the only way the Jewish people are going to make it is by always exhibiting a combination of valor, chutzpah, moxie. And, that's how we can stand up to Hezbollah and Iran and be surrounded by all these enemies. And if we're going to indulge in that kind of defeatism, we're done. So I think the message is, don't ever indulge that tendency. You can't afford to.
Yeah. So, Alex, there's a really famous line from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav who says, "Kol olam kulo gesher tsar me'od."
Yep.
The whole world is a narrow bridge, and then it's usually translated "v'ha'ikar lo lefached klal." But the main thing is not to be afraid. And I saw a very interesting article by somebody who had done some study who said that is not the correct quote. The actual correct quote is "v'ha'ikar lo lehitpached klal." Okay, changing the verb that means fear into a reflexive verb, which for those who are not grammar heads means that the essential thing that Rabbi Nachman said we should not do is not to be afraid. Everybody's afraid sometimes, like fear is normal. The thing is not to cause yourself unnecessary fear, right? That is the trick, is not to cause unnecessary fear.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that fits. Yeah.
That has always stuck with me. Okay, I'm curious if we could zoom out a little bit. What do you guys think about this rabbinic view that all of these right? It's not just about the destruction of the temple anymore. It's about all of these tragedies in Jewish history, and indeed in the way that we study, the way that we experience Tisha B'Av these days. People experience it as a day when we think about the Crusades and the Holocaust, like other things are all wrapped up into Tisha B'Av. It becomes a day to commemorate all Jewish tragedies, and they root it in this original sort of tragedy that Israel experienced in the wilderness. What do we think about this idea that all the tragedies are bundled together and that the mourning is really enforced, right? It's not optional. Like, you are going to mourn. That seems to be a clear message of all of this to me, that you are going to enact the mourning in the way that you behave during that week. You are going to fast that day. You're going to not study Torah there. You are going to experience the mourning. That is a requirement. That is, to me, so different from how our culture operates these days, at least mine in the United States. We often get international people in these calls, so I don't want to say everybody here is American, but I studied, I did a Hebrew Bible survey some time ago with a group of college students, all of whom were not Jewish. And we stepped through all the major texts of the Hebrew Bible, and I spent an entire class on the book of Lamentations, and I made them sit on the floor in the dark and read Lamentations, and all the way through, which is a long exercise for a college student. It's 5 long chapters of misery, and it's tedious, and it's hard, and it's unpleasant. And I said, this is what we're going to think about, how this text is meant to be experienced. This is how Jews experience it on Tisha B'Av. We're going to think about how this is experienced, and this idea that we're going to require people to have a moment of communal mourning. And then I asked them, like, what do you think it would look like if we did this in our secular culture, right? What we went through an entire global pandemic, and many people died,
Reminder.
isolated, and we did not really have cultural institutions that allowed us to mourn, let alone required us to mourn. What would be different, I asked them, if we had done that during the pandemic? And I'm curious what you guys think. Because this strikes me as something that's different about Jewish culture than it is about the larger culture that many of us are living in. This idea that, yeah, we are, right? I mean, think about how we celebrate Memorial Day these days, right? It's like a barbecue. right? I mean, some people, yes, but there isn't a large sense that everybody is going to pause and really mourn together. Right. So Lynn says it couldn't happen here and now because everything is politicized. Right. My hot take on this, and I'm curious if you guys think I'm right, I don't know if I'm right, is that maybe things wouldn't be so politicized if we had a chance to channel some of that pain in mourning and bringing ourselves closer, if the mourning would bring us together more closely and give us a chance to channel that pain, not by attacking each other politically. I don't know if you all agree, but I wonder if that would be the case. Yeah, okay. We've got, I'm curious what you guys think about this, but we are at the hour, but Becky, can we take 1 or 2 more questions? I see there are a whole bunch of hands still up.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with somebody who hasn't gone yet. So let's start with Lee.
Hi, Lee, I can't hear you.
There we go.
There you are.
It seems to me that I guess the most Memorial Day for an awful lot of people is about people that they don't know, that they have heard about, but there's not this closeness because not everybody is responsible for everybody else. Not everyone has that tradition. And so I think that it would, I'm thinking something like 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
If that were a civil holiday,
Yeah.
a civil commemoration, it's still close enough that it might make sense for people to respond to it.
Yeah. And that's something interesting about what the rabbis do by stitching these 5 events together, right? They
Yes.
include things that are very near to them, right? Presumably Beitar felt recent to them, and you knew people who knew people, or people had lost ancestors there if it was a later generation. And then they also attach it to this, sort of mythic beginning of the Israelite people in the wilderness, right? And all of those things are brought together on this one holiday and more together, so that the tragedy I've experienced is deeply connected to the tragedies that the people has experienced that might feel quite a lot more distant to me.
Because we were all there at Sinai. We were all there everywhere.
Right. So also on Shavuot, with joyous things, we do that too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But also with the mourning. Yeah.
Maybe we have time for one more. Let's go to Ruti.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Ruti.
Hi. First of all, thank you.
Oh,
It
nice.
was amazing, amazing, beautiful. So I want to take us a little bit back. Somebody asked before about the use of the term spies. I'm kind of taking it back to something that I hope will put us in a slightly different mood, because the mood, Tisha B'Av is putting us in a very specific mood, and it's already starting with something so wonderful like you did. I want to refer to the terminology in Hebrew about those men that were sent on that mission. First of all, they were called the men, ha'anashim. And then the interesting thing that I think some of you might find kind of wow is that a number of times the term used in Hebrew is Moshe sends them to latur et haaretz. Latur, exactly what you think, to tour the land. And then the verb that is used in Hebrew a number of times is they went and vayaturu et haaretz. They toured the land. Now, if anybody remembers this, the emblem, the symbol, the logo of the tourism authority in Israel is the 2 men carrying the huge cluster of grapes that they brought back because they were tourists. They toured the land and they brought back those wonderful fruit. So let's remember that they didn't only malign the land, they also brought those things that anybody who tours Israel and who goes in a van or in any car run by any of the guides, you are touring the land just like those two. And hopefully you have totally different impressions of what you're looking at. Anyway, I just wanted to take it a little bit away from the very, very good way of looking at those things. And again, you can hear from my accent, I'm very much here, but I'm in San Diego right now, but I'm also in my head.
I was
and in
going to
my
ask
heart
if it's the middle of the
somewhere else.
night for you right now.
No, in San Diego, it's
Not in San Diego. No, you're
oh,
not.
in Israel, yes. What I wanted to say was that as much as the rabbis attributed so much meaning to the month of Av and happy times and sad times, because they were strongly influenced by cosmology, whatever they called astronomy, which is their understanding of anything that happened in the world, again, guided by God and so on. Unfortunately, I wonder how they would have treated what happened on Simchat Torah. October 7th was Simchat Torah.
Yeah.
And it pains me deeply to think that, the calendar and the world events don't always follow the one. They have such a wonderful worldview, and everything is in the right way, in the right place. And there's an answer. We sometimes learn the hard way that it doesn't always work this way, but it was an amazing hour. So thank you again, Rachel.
Thank you, Ruti. And I'm glad you ended us on what a difficult year it has been. It has been an exceptionally difficult year. And I think people are feeling that this Tisha B'Av, that this is not, this tragedy, these past tragedies feel not isolated in the wake of so much loss of life this year, for sure. And people are thinking about this. And my hope and blessing for all of us is that this communal mourning can bring us connection and commemoration and comfort for all of these tragedies and enable us to move forward as a people. So I think we will leave it there for the hour, because I'm sorry I have run over more than I meant to. So I need to let all of you get on with your days, your nights, wherever it is, whatever it is for you. But thank you, everybody, for your really thoughtful comments, for inspiring me to go back and check out the Numbers episode of the Spies and look at it, or Scouts, and look at it a whole lot more carefully than I did in preparation for this presentation, and for helping me to think through how the rabbis thought about this day on the calendar. I hope that you have a meaningful Tisha B'Av, and thanks for participating.